泪容残粉花田中，乍是夹山金缕缝。One of the greatest Song Dynasty writers, Li Qingzhao, once noted in a poem that she used gold thread to hide the seams in her garments. This evokes an image of delicate, gauzy, gossamer-thin clothing, sparkling at the edges. But did women in the Song Dynasty actually wear clothing like this? And how is the clothing of the Song different from the previous Tang Dynasty? The legacy of the Song Dynasty is one of civility and grace. For the first time, government officials were chosen through examinations instead of aristocratic connections. Savvy emperors favored these civil bureaucrats over militant generals. Instead of fighting bloody wars with border tribes, the Chinese court ushered in an era of peace with offerings of silk and silver. The relative peace of the Song Dynasty allowed technology to advance rapidly and in turn affect society as a whole. Silk production was a huge part of Song economy and daily life. The process started from growing mulberry leaves, raising silkworms, reeling the silk from the cocoons, spinning it into thread, and finally weaving it into fabric. The new reeling frames used in the Song Dynasty could produce an extraordinary output, on par with steam-powered 19th century silk reels. The resulting surge in textile production enabled the Song people to consume ever larger quantities of silk and other textiles such as ramie and hemp. As often happens, the Song blamed the collapse of the previous dynasties on the very things that we remember them for today, like increased cultural exchanges, bright colors, and generously proportioned women. This resulted in Song aesthetics veering in the opposite direction. Records show that the climate during the Song Dynasty was actually colder, so people tended to wear less transparent clothing and more layers. Despite a shift in aesthetic tastes, the forms of Song garments still bore some resemblances to that of Tang Dynasty garments. For example, women still wore unlined tops called shan, or lined tops called fu. This would be paired with a skirt and accessorized with a long jacket called a beizi, or a short jacket called a banbi. More scandalously, women often wore a visible moxiong, which resembles a thin tube top on one's upper half. This could be surprisingly titillating, as shown by the clear signs of cleavage in some sculptures and paintings. Although trousers were worn, women generally still wore skirts. Wrap skirts with 1 or 2 panels were worn. The latter similar to the mamian skirt style that would later become a mainstay in the Ming and Qing dynasties. Pleated wrap skirts were also popular. Trousers on the outside would have only been worn by laboring women, such as the housewife and mother-in-law in the iconic silk spinning picture 纺车图 painted by Wang Juzheng in the Northern Song. These trousers were usually closed at the crotch. Richer women wore open crotch trousers under the skirts. Outside their top, tops, both men and women could wear long center front opening jackets called 被子, which usually had slits on the sides. A 披帛, which was a long scarf-like piece of fabric, went on top of everything. For the Song Dynasty woman, the ideal body type was, once again, willowy, slender, and pale. Pastel secondary colors called 间色, such as pale pink, pale green, and pale purple were the norm. Clothing tended to cover more skin than in the Tang. The plainness of these garments and their tasteful, small botanical motifs belied the extravagance of the hair and makeup of elite women in the Song. The upper class indulged in lavish makeup, even gluing pearls to their faces, known as 珍珠花田. Empress Liu, consort to Emperor Zhenzong, was one famous example. Besides the pearls, Empress Liu's portrait shows traces of other cosmetics. Purple pigment sweeps across her eyebrows on a white powder foundation. A very pale, almost pallid skin tone was standard, as were narrowly plucked and penciled brows. Lips were painted red in their natural shape. Towering hairstyles supported by hairpieces and scaffolding carried over from the Tang Dynasty as well. Some of these loopy styles are immortalized on religious Taoist figures which can still be seen in temples today. Also during this time, the Chinese custom of foot binding began. The process involves breaking a young girl's feet to make them smaller. Unusually small shoes from women's tombs have often been used as evidence that the women of the Song were harshly oppressed and had next to no agency. The rise of neo-Confucianism is often cited when discussing women's limited roles in Song society. For example, many neo-Confucians believed that widows should remain faithfully unmarried to the end of their days. Yet that was seldom the reality. A married woman could actually hang on to her own property inherited from her family via her dowry, even through several husbands if needed. The neo-Confucians did approve of women learning to read and write for the purposes of learning the classics and teaching their sons, of course. Despite the many limitations on a woman's role in Song society, there were still women like Li Qingzao. Apart from being one of the most famous writers in Chinese history, she also indulged in scholarly cultural affairs. She could do everything, from painting to calligraphy to playing the qin to collecting antiques. She shared these interests with her scholar official husband, and by all accounts, they enjoyed a loving and intellectually stimulating partnership. An example of marital bliss include husband and wife playing an early version of football called 蹴鞠 together. Depicted on the back of a bronze mirror in equal size, they appear to be friends and equals. It is easy to make sweeping judgments when discussing history, such as Song clothing being the polar opposite of the Tang. However, the truth is usually more nuanced. In fact, many aspects of Tang clothing and culture were preserved in the Song. While Song women were still bound by the tenets of neo-Confucianism, they also had a surprising amount of agency regarding what they wore, what they owned, and who they loved.